Welcome to our latest Hoopcast. Pat Dooley of the Gainesville Sun, along with Kevin Brockway, who covers the Florida basketball team for the Gainesville Sun. And it's the Cats coming to town, Kevin. It's not the usual buzz, the usual juice that this game would have, but it's still Florida, Kentucky.
Two teams not ranked for the first time since probably the early 1990s, back in the kind of Lon Kruger, Rick Pitino years. But, I still think a few subplots, certainly, one of them being, Billy's brief flirtation last year with Kentucky, and also Jay Lucas and Patrick Patterson on two sides, two guys that thought that they might have been playing together. It didn't work out that way. And certainly Florida could use a guy like Patrick Patterson right now, couldn't they?
Well, I think Kentucky might be able to use a Jay Lucas because the way they're going, it's pretty amazing. I looked this up yesterday. Kentucky has never come to Gainesville with a losing record before. This is the first time. So why ESPN chose this game to be their first game day is beyond me. But as you know, last time they did it was a huge deal, and people were losing their minds, and Florida went on to win that night. I think the biggest story to me, while certainly what you were talking about with Billy and Patrick Patterson, all that are great subplots, the biggest story is the streak that Florida has over Kentucky.
It's unbelievable when you think about beating Kentucky for that amount of times. And certainly, Kentucky had Florida's number before that, winning 8 in a row. So it's been a series of streaks, and I think a lot of it probably has had to do with talent. Certainly, that Noah Horford front line, that Chris Richard front line created, Kentucky a lot of problems. I don't think it's going to be quite that same situation tomorrow night.
Yeah, but you know what? It really started with a different group of kids, and Matt Walsh and Roberson and David Lee. They got that huge win here in Gainesville. They beat them in the SEC tournament, which nobody thought was possible, especially since they referred to it as Catland at the time. And what Florida's been able to do, I think it's not just the Horford-Noah group. They certainly contributed winning 4 in a row from those guys.
Yeah, definitely. But it is pretty interesting when you look back at that game and the players, the elation of that game. It was 53-52. It was really kind of an ugly game. And then Matt Walsh jumping into the stands and stuff, taking his shirt off, and it was like the greatest win in the world. And nowadays, beating Kentucky for Florida has almost ironically since then become old hat.
Well, and for pretty much everybody this year, it's been an unusual situation in that Florida playing a Kentucky team at 7-8, and Billy Gillespie might want to sign that contract soon because I got a feeling we know they're not very happy up there. I mean, you've watched this Kentucky team play. What's your observations about why they're not any good?
It's, it was really strange, first of all, them, going down to Mississippi State Tuesday night, talking about moral victories and playing hard. But I think injuries have certainly played a role with Jody Meeks. They're expecting a lot of scoring from him. He's had problems all year with his hip and his pelvis. Certainly Derek Jasper with the knee. You have Ramel Bradley playing point guard. That's not his ideal position. It's not really his ideal spot. He turns the ball over a little bit. Sometimes he gets lost. He can score a little bit. And I think it's probably taken a while with the transition, getting used to Billy Gillespie's style. I mean, he practices on shoot-arounds pretty much like full intense practices. And I think a lot of those guys, I think people, in the beginning of the year when they ranked Kentucky, and I didn't, as an AP poll voter, I didn't rank them. They underestimated, one, the transition between, the players we're going to have with Gillespie, and two, just I think the talent, too. The talent level is just not where it's been in the past.
I mean, we've seen this team play, Kevin, and just being up there last year, for example, Florida pulled out a close win, but there was no question about the talent differential. And like you said, there has been an adjustment. I mean, Alex Legion obviously didn't like it very much and bolted on him. They've had the injuries, but still 7-8 losing to Gardner Webb, which we saw the team that came in here the other day, or earlier in the year, Charleston, came in here, and they'd beaten Gardner Webb. And Gardner Webb beat Kentucky. And Florida, of course, destroyed them. I mean, it's just hard to imagine that they're playing this bad.
Yeah, and I think, like you said before, you have a walk-on starting at power forward, Mark Curry, because Perry Stevenson hasn't developed. It's been tough all around, certainly, for Big Blue Nation, and I'm sure they expected a little more than this from Gillespie in his first season. But that being said, I think that they took a little bit of confidence in beating Vanderbilt in double overtime, and I did think that they played very hard against Mississippi State. They just didn't have, Patrick Patterson couldn't get going inside because Jarvis Fernardo was swatting him, pretty much the whole entire game.
Shots,
yeah, exactly.
Not too bad.
But a lot of that's the byproduct of not having a second big man that they could rely on. And
it's funny because Patterson, if it comes to Florida's got 2. But instead he goes there and almost it's like neither one really has a guy who's they can count on. I mean, Patterson's been good, but he hasn't been great. The big question for Florida is Maurice Spates ever going to show up this year? I mean, benched the last 12 minutes. He has done very little. He's averaging 8 points a game in SEC play. I mean, Kevin, you cover this team on a daily basis. And what's the deal with Maurice?
Well, I know it's become fashionable to, kind of bash Maurice a little bit. And let's, blame him maybe for global warming and all the other problems.
It is his fault.
Exactly. But, he kind of teases you. It's really funny. At the end of the first half in Ole Miss, he gets a shot block. He goes back up strong. He gets a basket. You think maybe he's going to come out in the second half, play a little bit harder. Then you see him one-arming rebounds again. And Billy saw that in the first 4 minutes and just sat him on the bench for the rest of the half. And maybe it sends some kind of a message going into Kentucky. I still think you don't give up on the guy because he's got a world of offensive potential. He can pass well. But sooner or later, he's going to have to learn, play hard on both ends of the floor and maintain your conditioning if you're going to survive in the SEC. And he's had a big problem doing that.
Terrible try. I mean, has even opted out of some conditioning drills or tried to get out of them. That's something that they're not going to put up with. It's funny, Kevin, because watching that game on television, in the first 2 minutes, I went, Spates didn't show up tonight, to my wife. It took Billy longer than I figured it out right away. He didn't show up. But the guys who did show up, Chandler Parsons coming out of nowhere to have a big game in that game. Obviously Dan Warner in the first half. Alex Tyus played well. I mean, this team almost seems like it's getting there, but not quite yet.
Yeah, and I thought Parsons, it was really big for him because, he had been sick last week with strep throat and everything. And he comes out, he makes some shots. That kind of builds his confidence. He'd been really struggling with his shot, pretty much for the last few weeks. And for him to come out and have that kind of game, I think certainly, if Florida can get that kind of production out of the bench, they got 30 points out of their bench against Ole Miss. I think it bodes well for the future. I think that's one of the positives you take from the Ole Miss game. That, and they only lost by 2 on the road against a ranked team.
Yeah, I mean, it really wasn't a 2-point game, but it ended up being the final score. I think this is a ginormous game for Florida because they're facing a team, if they get through this Kentucky game, 3-1 through the first fourth of the schedule. I think that's all anybody could have hoped for. And if you lose this game at home, you've got to win your home games if you're going to go to the tournament. Yeah,
you protect at home, and also you create a little bit of separation because, Vanderbilt lost last night to Tennessee. They're 1-2 in the league. Now you've got, Kentucky would be 1-2, and you're sitting at 3-1. In second place behind Tennessee if you win this game, creates a little bit of separation, in the SEC East race, which certainly will help Florida because, the schedule doesn't get any easier as you go into late January and early February.
Well, it's a huge game for Florida, and of course Tennessee appears to be the class of this conference right now, so for the Gators, they just need to keep pace there, and as you said, maybe get some separation. The key is you got to win this game. It's a home game. It's not a great Kentucky team, and obviously it'll be loud. It'll be exciting. 9 o'clock game. All the fans will be there early for game day. It should be a fun weekend, and look forward to it. And you'll be there. I'll be there. Everybody will be there.
Oh, unfortunately, Dickie V won't be there, but he's recovering. He should be back for February. It'll be sad not to have him around, but ESPN will bring the crew, and it'll be certainly a lively atmosphere for basketball.
Well, if you're going to be there, we'll see you there. If not, you can catch up with us again on next week's early week podcast or Hoopcast when we talk about Florida's games for next week. Until then, Pat Dooley, the Gainesville Sun, Kevin Brockway, the Gainesville Sun, saying so long from the Sunshine State.